Okay, so what I wanted to do right now is go ahead and introduce you to the subject pronouns. Subject pronouns are pretty much if, say, you want to call a person by name. So you want to say Michael. Instead of saying Michael, you would replace Michael's name with he. And that's why you see in here the I, the you, he, she, and so forth. In Spanish, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and go through this right here is a conjugation chart, and you will see this type of chart quite often in Spanish. So what I want to do is you can see that these are set up by quadrants, and the first quadrant is the I. In class, we've learned what I is in Spanish, and so you would say yo. Moving on down to the U, notice how there's a parenthesis and it says informal. We'll talk about that in just a second. But in Spanish, the informal is tú. Moving on down to the next quadrant, you notice how there's a U and it's formal. That one is usted. And you probably recognize that one in class because we have used it quite a bit. Now, I want to talk for a moment the difference between these two. You notice how there's two U's in Spanish. One is the informal and one is the formal. So when do you use the informal tú? You may have heard in class, maybe some Hispanics in our own class speaking, and you might have heard them say tú. Okay? They're speaking in informal Spanish. If you look over here at the top, I put a little asterisk here and it explains the difference between informal and formal Spanish. The informal is pretty much used when you're talking to friends or people you know. And that would explain why Hispanics in class might be speaking in informal Spanish because they're speaking amongst their friends. Now the formal is used when you're talking to, say, older people. It's to show respect. It can be used to speak to people that you might not know. So, for example, in class, we use the usted quite a bit. And the reason for that is because when you go out in the real world, you're most likely, when you're working at a business, you're most likely going to be talking to strangers, people you don't know. So you're going to want to address them in the usted form, the formal form. Anyways, that's a little breakdown of what the difference between informal and formal Spanish is. Now I want to go ahead and move down to the he. In Spanish, he is él. The she is ella. And notice how there's an it. Okay. We will get to that at another time, but just know that it is found in this quadrant. Moving on to this top right quadrant, this is where the we or the nosotros is found. Notice how there's an AS. I can easily exchange or switch out this OS for the AS. And that's used, the AS, nosotras, is used when, say, everybody in that group is a girl. Okay? If there's a mix of girls and guys, you would default to the masculine, which is nosotros. This one here is vosotros, and this is not used. Okay? So most Spanish teachers, including myself, don't teach it because it's only used in Spain. Okay? Moving on down to the you all, this one would be ustedes. Ustedes. Move that over just a little bit. See if I can widen this. Okay. I'll put myself over here now. So the ustedes is you all, and the ellos is they. And notice how there is an AS as well on this one. And that is simply because if you're talking again about girls, it's going to be ellas. Now, if there's a mix, just like in nosotros, there's a mix of guys and girls, then it would default to the masculine ellos. Now, one thing I want to point out, as you've looked at all these different quadrants, you might notice that this bottom right, okay, quadrant, there are quite a few things found in this quadrant. There's two things found in this quadrant, whereas in the other quadrants, there's only one thing. So these subject pronouns become very important, especially in this area and in this area, because when you start to speak Spanish and use a verb, you're going to want to include the subject pronoun, okay, since these are going to be conjugated the same. For example, you've heard habla, usted habla, which is you speak. It's also él habla, which is he speaks. Ella habla. So if you just said habla, then someone might not know what you're talking about, who you're referring to. But if you include the subject pronoun, usted habla, or él habla, or ella habla, then it is clarified. So really, these subject pronouns are used to clarify who is being talked about. Over here, the same thing applies. This can mean two different things. So these subject pronouns become very important to use. However, the ones over here, nosotros, only means one thing. The yo only means one thing, and the tú only means one thing. So it's not as important to include them when speaking. It is included sometimes, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's included just to help to emphasize, to put emphasis on when you're talking. But anyways, these are the subject pronouns, and hopefully this helps you a little bit to better understand them.